Hello sports fans, welcome to Spruce Sports Central. Today, we're going to go over my 2026 UFL predictions. So we'll dive right into things and we'll start with my standing predictions. And the UFL, they actually got rid of divisions in the offseason, so now all 8 teams are just in one group. But we'll start off finishing 8th or last in the UFL. I've got the Louisville Kings. So they're a new franchise and they've got a lot of potential, but as far as this year goes, I don't really think they're going to be so great. Now the offense, they've got a lot of potential because there's some talent on this offense. Their starting quarterback is former Kansas quarterback Jason Bean, and I like him a lot, especially with what he can do as a runner. And then speaking of their run game, the Kings, they got a couple solid running backs with the former Pittsburgh Steeler Benny Snell, as well as Jalen Jackson, who was solid last year with the Showboats. Then the receiver room is also solid, although definitely not the best in the UFL, but they've got some very capable wide receivers, as they've got Lucky Jackson, Javonta Payton, Isaiah Winstead, who had a great year last year with the Renegades, and they've also got Jonathan Adams, although he is on IR and will miss the start of the year. Now, the defense for the Kings is not the greatest, but they've got some solid players, like former Notre Dame defensive end R.J. Oben, they've got former Ohio State linebacker Steele Chambers, and former Minnesota Viking Cam Dantzler. But overall, I don't really think this defense is going to be great for the Kings. But as a team for the Kings, they got a lot of potential. I think they can definitely have a good offense, but I think this defense could hold this team back. And overall, I don't think it's going to be a great year 1 in the UFL. And I've got the Louisville Kings finishing last or 8th in the UFL at 2-8. 7th in the UFL, I've got the Houston Gamblers. So the Gamblers, they're just last year's Roughnecks team being rebranded as the Gamblers. And this was the team that was solid last year, as I believe they went 5-5. And I think they should be solid once again, although I definitely have my questions about this team, and that is why I have them finishing in 7th. But the offense, they've got a lot of potential. Now, I do have questions about their quarterback, as they named Nolan Henderson their starting quarterback. And he's seen limited action in the UFL over the past few years, but when we've seen him play, he's been a great runner, but he's been fairly inconsistent as a passer. Now, the Gamblers also have former Iowa State quarterback Hunter Deckers, and he could also see some playing time, although he's fairly inexperienced. But outside the quarterback position for the Gamblers, they've got some playmakers. Running back Kirk Merritt is a great dual threat back, and having him healthy this year would be great after he missed a lot of last year with an injury. And they've also got a great wide receiver duo with Justin Hall, who's been one of the most consistently good receivers in the UFL. And they've also brought in John Che Kirkland, and he wasn't great last year, but he's shown he can be an elite receiver in the UFL. But overall, this offense for Houston, I feel like they're in a very similar position that they were in last year, where it really depends on the quarterback position. Now, obviously, a lot depends on the quarterback position for every team. But because I have my questions, I think the quarterback play could end up holding this offense back. And that's pretty much what we saw last year. The quarterback play wasn't great with Nolan Henderson and Anthony Brown at the start of the year. Then they turned to Jalen McClendon towards the end of the year, and the offense finally started to play a lot better. But this is an offense with a lot of potential, but a lot obviously rests on the shoulders of the quarterback. Now, defensively for the Gamblers, they also look pretty good. And they're actually led by a couple former DC defenders, as they brought in defensive end Malik Fisher, as well as linebacker Anthony Hines. And those are 2 big pickups for this defense. And the Gamblers, they also bring back last year's leading tackle Marvin Moody. And I also like the secondary, and they've got a good safety duo with former LSU safety Major Burns and Markel Roby, who's been great for the Gamblers over the past few seasons. But the Gamblers, obviously, I explained it before, I think a lot rests on the shoulders of the quarterback, and if they can get good quarterback play, I think this could be a playoff team. But because I've got my questions about quarterback, I've got them finishing 7th and going 4-6. 6th in the UFL, I've got the Dallas Renegades. So the Renegades, they're a team that is very interesting, and I think they got a high ceiling but a low floor. Now, they no longer have head coach Bob Stoops after he retired in the offseason, and they hired Rick Neuheisel as their new head coach, and they do have the advantage there because he is one of the more experienced coaches in the league. Now, the offense for the Renegades is very interesting, because they should be pretty good, but they have a weird situation at quarterback. Because they have Luis Perez, who's been their starter over the past several seasons, and he's been one of the better quarterbacks in the UFL. But the Renegades, they also have former Western Kentucky quarterback Austin Reed, who put up huge numbers in college, and they've actually named him their starting quarterback for Week 1. Now, it does seem like Luis Perez is also going to play, but that is the problem. I think the Renegades just need to find one quarterback and stick with him. Now, whether that's Austin Reed or Luis Perez, I don't really think it matters because I think both are good players, but they need to find a true starting quarterback and not go back and forth, and I think that could hurt this team early in the season. Now, the run game for the Renegades, I don't really think it's going to be that great. Now, I might be wrong, but I don't really love their running backs, because they have Day-Day Hunter and Lorenzo Wingard, and I don't really think either is a great player. Now, Day-Day Hunter is solid, and he was with the Renegades last year, but only averaged 3.6 yards per carry, and I definitely worry about how effective this run game will be when you have 2 running backs who aren't the most effective runners. Now, the receivers For the Renegades, they're solid, although they also did lose some key players, as tight end Sal Cannella and receiver Isaiah Winstead are both no longer with the team. But they still have their leading receiver from last year, Tyler Vaughns. They also signed former Jets receiver Denzel Mims, and they brought in Oregon State receiver Silas Bolden, who's great with the ball in his hands. So, even though they lost a couple key pass catchers, I still think this group of receivers is pretty good. Then, on the defensive side of things for the Renegades, they look pretty good. Now, they did lose defensive end Chris Odom, who had 5 sacks last year, but they brought back their sacks leader from last season, Willie Taylor, and they've also brought in Taco Charlton, who was good in the second half of last year after the Renegades signed him. And the rest of this defense looks pretty good as well, as Donald Payne is one of the better linebackers in the UFL, and the secondary also looks pretty good, led by Ajane Harris, who led the UFL with 3 interceptions last season. But this is a Renegades team that has the potential to be pretty good, especially if they figure out the quarterback position, although I do worry about their offense a little bit if they don't come up with a clear quarterback one, because I also don't think their run game is going to be too great. But the Renegades, they can definitely be a playoff team, but they could also very well miss the playoffs, and I've got them actually missing the playoffs, going 5-5 and finishing 6th in the UFL. 5th in the UFL, I've got the Columbus Aviators. So they're a new team, and I think they've got a lot of potential, although I'm also not entirely sure what to expect from them. But the offense for the Aviators, they look pretty good, and they're led by quarterback Jalen McClendon. And I'm excited to see what he can do, as he finally gets a chance to be a team's starting quarterback, because over the past few years he's been mostly a backup, but he had to look pretty good when he played. Now, I think McClendon should also be helped out by a good run game, because they have a great running back room with Toa Tawa, who led the UFL in touchdowns last year, and they've also got a couple other good running backs with John Lovett and Zaquandre White. Now, the receiver position I don't love for the Aviators, because their top 4 receivers are Kike Chisholm, Jalen Moore, Juice Wells, and Devin Ross. Now, those guys definitely aren't bad, but when comparing them to the rest of the receiver corps in the UFL, I don't really think they're amazing. But while the receivers aren't the greatest, they do have 2 good tight ends in Gunnar Oaks and Alize Mack, so that can definitely make up for it. Then defensively for the Aviators, I think they look pretty good, and they're actually led by a bunch of former Michigan Panthers, as they've got good players in all 3 levels, with Kenny Wilkes along the defensive line, Noah Dawkins at linebacker, and DJ Miller in the secondary. But the Aviators, I think they're another team, they got a lot of potential, but I think they're going to be a very well-rounded team, but I think they're going to just miss the playoffs, also finishing 5-5, but they're my first team out of the playoffs, despite finishing 5-5. 4th in the UFL, I've got another new team, the Orlando Storm. So there is a lot of potential here for the Storm in year 1, and that starts offensively at the quarterback position with Dorian Thompson-Robinson. Now, he hasn't technically been named the team's starting quarterback, and is currently in a battle with former Cal quarterback Jack Plummer, but I think either player can be a solid quarterback in the UFL, although if it was up to me, I would definitely give the starting job to Dorian Thompson-Robinson, because he's a great running quarterback. Now, he's never exactly been an elite passer, but if he can even be a solid passer and an elite runner, he has potential to be a league MVP. Now, outside the quarterback position, this offense has some playmakers, as they've got a great running back in Jashawn Corbin, who was last year's league leader in rushing, and they also signed Trey Stewart, who was insanely productive in his time at Jacksonville State a couple years ago. Now, the receiver room I have some questions about, and they're not the deepest, but they do have 2 solid receivers in former Broncos receiver KJ Hamler, as well as Chris Rowland, who's been a very solid spring football receiver. And then the defense I really like. Their defensive line looks great with Will Yarbury and Isaiah Buggs. They got a great linebacker with former San Antonio Brahma Devontae Beckett, and they've also got a good secondary led by Mark Gilbert, Micah Abraham, and former Bears corner Lamar Jackson. But the Storm, they have a lot of potential, and if they can figure out the quarterback position, and if DTR or Jack Plummer can play at a high level, this team has a lot of potential, and I think they could be the best team in the UFL. But because there is some questions at quarterback, I'm going to put the Storm 4th in the UFL. I do have them making the playoffs, but they're the 3rd team in a row that goes 5-5. Although, it's really close for me between the 4 through 6 teams, so the Storm, Aviators, and Renegades. You can really put them in any order. If you want to put the Renegades 4 and put them in the playoffs, I'm perfectly fine with that. But I think the Storm are probably the best of the 3, and that is why I did put them 4th and making the playoffs. 3rd in the UFL, I've got the St. Louis Battlehawks. So the Battlehawks, they had a good year last year, and they're one of the best teams in the UFL. But once again, they fell short in the playoffs, and that has been a common theme over the past few years. But the Battlehawks, they look pretty good once again. Now, last year, the offense was held back by bad quarterback play with Max Duggan, but I think their quarterback play is going to be a lot better this year, because they hired AJ Smith as their offensive coordinator, who's one of the better coordinators in the UFL, and they also signed a quarterback who's got experience with AJ Smith and a lot of experience in spring football, and that is Brandon Silvers. And he was with the Battlehawks last year, never really saw a ton of playing time, but when he did, he looked pretty good. So I think he's going to be a major upgrade for the Battlehawks at quarterback from last year to this year, And there's also a lot of good weapons for Brandon Silvers, because they have a great wide receiver core with Hakeem Butler, Blake Jackson, Frank Darby, and Ja'Cory Pearson. And the running backs are pretty solid as well, led by Jarvion Howard, who was a very solid running back too last year for the Battlehawks. Although, they did lose last year's leading rusher Jacob Sellers, who's now in the NFL, so that is a big loss, but I do think Howard is very capable of replacing him. Now, the defense for the Battlehawks should be pretty good. They did lose star linebacker Willie Harvey, but I still think this defense should be great. They brought back a great edge rusher duo, Travis Feeney and Pita Tamanapenu. The linebackers are still good, as they brought in Jordan Williams, and the secondary also looks good after signing Lou Barku and Jordan Mosley. Plus, they also brought in a couple former Stallions with Daniel Isom and Devell Clark. But this is a Battlehawks team that I think is going to be pretty good. I think they'll be in the playoffs once again, and I've got them going 6-4, finishing 3rd in the UFL. Second in the UFL, I've got the Stallions. So the Stallions, they're coming off a year where they went 7-3, and they did not win the championship for the first time in the modern era. But the Stallions, they no longer have head coach Skip Holtz after he decided to step away from the team, and they hired AJ McCarron as their new head coach. Now, he's never been a head coach before. He could be terrible, but even if he isn't great, this roster is still incredibly talented, and I still think they should be a good team. Now, the offense for the Stallions, I think they should be one of the best, if not the best, in the UFL. Matt Corral is their starting quarterback, and he's in his 3rd year with the team, but it's really his first chance to get the full-time starting job. Now, he has been limited by injuries over the past couple years, but if he can stay healthy, he can definitely win league MVP. And then outside of Matt Corral, there is a lot of talent on this offense. Now, the Stallions, they do lose running back CJ Marable and Ricky Person, but they still have a great running back duo of Anthony McFarland and Ty Davis Price, and the receiver room is insane, as they brought back Deion Kane and Marlon Williams, plus they added former NFL receiver Laviska Shenault, former Clemson standout Justin Ross, and former NFL receiver John Ross, who is the second fastest 40-yard dash time at the NFL Combine. Then the defense for the Stallions, I don't think they're quite as good as they are last year, but I still think this is a solid defense, and they've got some good players, like defensive lineman TJ Carter, who had a good year with the Michigan Panthers last season. Now, the linebackers, they still also look pretty good, with the duo of Tay Crowder and Calvin Zeno returning. And the secondary did lose some key players, but I still think the secondary is pretty solid. But the Stallions, I think they should be a pretty good team. The one area I do worry about is the offense, not because they don't have talent, but because Matt Corral has been fairly inconsistent when he has seen playing time with the Stallions. But if he can be more consistent, this offense should be scoring well over 30 points a game. And if this offense is playing at a high level, the Stallions are going to be very hard to beat. But I've got them 2nd in the league at 6-4. And finishing atop the UFL standings, I've got the defending champs, the DC Defenders. So the Defenders, they obviously won the UFL title last year, and I think they're in a very good position to potentially go back-to-back, because their roster is loaded once again. Now, the offense, they should be great. Jordan Teamu was back after a great year last year, leading the league in passing touchdowns, although I am a little bit worried about him, because he seems to have a pattern where he alternates years he's good. Because in 2022, in the USFL with the Bandits, he led the league in interceptions. Then in 2023 with the Defenders in the XFL, he was the Offensive Player of the Year. Then in 2024, he led the league in interceptions again, before last year leading the Defenders to a championship. So I'm a little bit concerned about that he might go back to his pattern and have a bad year this year, but I still think he should be a pretty good player. Now, outside of Jordan Teamu, this offense is quite good. They've got a great running back duo of Abram Smith and Deion Jackson, both were with the team last year, and the receiver room is also great. As Ty Scott is back healthy, they've also got Braylon Sanders, Cornell Powell, and Cornell Powell actually led the UFL in touchdowns last year with 7. And then you move to the defensive side of the ball, they have a really good defense, and they do lose some key players that I talked about before who went to, I believe, the Gamblers with Anthony Hines and Malik Fisher, but this defense is still really good. They've got a great edge rusher duo of former NFL lineman Boogie Basham as well as Derek Robertson, and even though they lost Anthony Hines at linebacker, there's still plenty of talent to replace him, and the secondary looks good, led by DeAndre Baker, who's been one of the best corners in the UFL over the past couple years. But this is a Defenders team. I think they're in a really good spot to defend their title. I've got them finishing 1st in the UFL during the regular season, going 7-3. And then moving on to my playoff predictions, and because there's no more divisions, it's just the top 4 teams in the UFL standings are make the playoffs. But playoff semifinal number 1, we've got the Storm at the Defenders, and I'm going to take the Defenders here. I just think they're the better overall team. I think the Storm could be a great team if they can figure out quarterback, but I just think the Defenders are a little bit better overall, plus they've got the experience from last season. And then the second semifinal, we've got the Battlehawks at the Stallions, and this will be a really fun matchup. We get to see AJ McCarron against his former team in the playoffs, and I think the Karen and the Stallions get the win. I just think this team is slightly better. I think the weapons they have offensively gives them the edge, and I've got the Stallions getting the win and getting back to the championship game. And then in the UFL Championship, you've got the Defenders against the Stallions, the two most recent UFL champions, and the only two teams we've seen win the UFL. But this will be a great matchup, and I'm going to take the DC Defenders to win the 2026 UFL Championship. I just think this team is slightly better, and an underrated part of the Defenders is their coaching staff, because they're pretty much the only team in the UFL to return their entire coaching staff from last season, and I think that is a major advantage, not only over the Stallions, but against every other team in the UFL. But I think the DC Defenders go back-to-back, and they're my 2026 UFL champions. But those are my 2026 UFL predictions, and how I think every team will perform in this season. Let me know in the comments what you guys think. If you disagree with any of my predictions, let me know. I'd love to hear your thoughts. But thank you guys for watching. Be sure to like the video, subscribe, turn notifications. I do my best to post as often as possible. I will see you in the next video.